The parent company of Bell Media is BCE, which stands for Bell Corporate Entity. No, not really. BCE is Bell Canada Enterprises, even though their entire enterprise seems to be corporate entity. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. Each week on my podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 12, Chapter 2.
Bell Media. Culpa.
Bell Media announces major workforce layoffs. Type that into your search engine. You'll get results from 2024, 2023, 2022, 2021, 2020, 2019, when I was part of that layoff, and years before that. Last year, during the annual Bell Media bloodletting, they actually also shut the switch on a bunch of radio stations. Gone silent. Gone entirely. Gone. One day broadcasting, the next day not even static on the dial. Radio silence. 3 of the stations shuttered were comedy stations under the brand name Funny. Funny 1040, Funny 1290, Funny 1060. Suddenly, not so funny. No one was laughing. That was a first. Bell Media staff had already been accustomed to the yearly greetings at the Christmas party. Merry Christmas, hope you're not fired. Merry Christmas, hope you're not fired. That's what it was like working at Bell Media. We did our jobs running through the doorways to try and avoid the built-in guillotine. But actually closing radio stations? Going dark? Wow. Well, that was certainly going to be a tough one to top. But never underestimate the power of evil. Bell President Mirko Bibic and his band of thieves marauding the media landscape, robbing people of their lives and jobs and dignity and future. The reverse Robin Hoods, stealing from the poor and giving to the rich, which were them. At the beginning of each year, Bell Media does this Let's Talk campaign, an awareness and fundraiser for mental wellness. Bell Let's Talk Day is structured annually, just like a lot of those corporate alleged charity days. McHappy Day, Tim Hortons Camp Day. Proceeds from each Big Mac, from each Smile Cookie, from each text. You have to buy their product in order for this to work. You guys already make billions. Why don't you just donate some money, you big fat corporate greedy bastards? Oh, no, we can't do anything just for the good of it. We must also benefit. Buy our product, or no one gets any help. Anyway, Bell Let's Talk Mental Health Day was usually a sign that Big Bell cutbacks and firings were just around the corner. In the same way we anticipate New Year's just after Christmas, when it's Bell Let's Talk Day, can Bell employee executions be far behind? 2024, they did not disappoint. They topped last year and then some. The 2024 Bell Corporate Entity announcement said they were getting rid of 4,800 workers and selling 45 of their 103 radio stations. One of the radio stations that survived is the one that former disgraced fornicating Toronto Mayor John Tory is working at. John's daughter is on the Bell Board of Directors, but I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. So why did I even bring it up? I shouldn't have. If I remember, I'll edit out those sentences in the final mix of this podcast. Of the 4,800 staff from all levels of Bell, they were quick to point out that it was about 9% of their total workforce. Because 9% sounds much smaller than 5,000 people. Almost 5,000 people with lives, families, mortgages. Well, Bell isn't running a not-for-profit, is it? Maybe they need to cut jobs in order to save other jobs. Well, if it's come down to that, as a way for you to run your company, bigger questions have to be answered. Because Bell, in a middle finger to the recently released, actually said that these changes would enable them to pay better dividends to their shareholders. Can you believe that? Wound open, salt everywhere. The Bell Media Brain Trust pointed out that after extensive research, they felt that radio was no longer a viable business. Setting aside for a moment, and only a moment, that they may be correct, they actually found buyers for those radio stations. Whoever the Bell snake oil salesman is that made that deal, that person should get a bonus.
Hi, hello, I have a non-viable business. Would you like to buy it? You would? Oh, okay, I'll draw up the papers.
So who's buying non-viable radio right now? Obviously, people who don't agree with the non-viability premise, or idiots. Maybe it's a combination of both. The radio group I worked at in Niagara was sold to a Christian-based small independent broadcast company. I guess they believe that Jesus is good journalism and will help sell soap. We'll see. Oh, and just because these radio stations were sold doesn't mean that further job cuts aren't coming. They likely are. If Bell were to be truthful, they wouldn't just say that radio is not a viable business. They would say that over the years, Bell and other big media companies, through cutbacks, have eroded the viability of radio and are, at the very least, culpable in its demise. Have you ever heard one of those horrible stories of a parent who runs over their own kid in the driveway of the family home? That's this. I was glad to see that the Canadian Prime Minister called out this latest Bell Media decision for what it is.
We've seen over the past years, journalistic outlets, radio stations, small community newspapers, bought up by corporate entities who then lay off journalists, change the offering, the quality of offering to people. And then when people don't watch as much or engage as much, the corporate entity says, oh, see, they're not profitable anymore. We're going to sell them off. This is the erosion, not just of journalism, of quality local journalism, at a time where people need it more than ever, given misinformation and disinformation, but it's eroding our very democracy.
Justin Trudeau did not mince words.
I'm furious. This is a garbage decision. So yeah, I'm pretty pissed off about what's just happened.
If you listen to this podcast regularly, you know that I'm not a big fan of the term social media. I use it, I know what it means, I know what people think it means. This is the problem. Media has been divided into two categories: traditional media, newspapers, radio, TV, and social media, everything else. The word media is a plural, just like the word data. Media is the plural of medium, borrowed from the Latin, meaning an intervening agency, means, or instrument. Media was first applied to newspapers over 2 centuries ago. About 130 years ago, Marconi gave us radio. Eventually, radio and TV were electronic media. Newspapers, magazines, et al. Were the print media. Guess what? It was always social. It's all social. That's what media is, an intervener or instrument of society. The term social media comes from the Department of Redundancy Department. And the term social media became popular because it was aided and abetted by the so-called traditional media. They seemed, and still do in many cases, to be eager to promote the competition. How many times have you tuned in and heard, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter? Did anyone see that video on Instagram? Hey, here's an interesting thread on Reddit. It's like they're saying, thank you for joining me on your local radio station, but did you know there's something way more interesting on another channel? That's where all the ears and eyeballs went, to those other channels. Recently, broadcasters and print, in a desperate attempt at relevancy, went to the Canadian federal government, saying that Google, Facebook, and the like should pay traditional media anytime the traditional media content, links, etc., appear on those sites. Weirdly, the feds agreed and hurriedly passed Bill C-18, the Online News Act, demanding that Google and Facebook share revenues. Ridiculous. Facebook responded by banning any links to Canadian news sources. That's what the government accomplished so far. Poor service and interrupted access for Canadians. Good job. CBC and Bell Media run ads now promoting their apps.
Find breaking news, weather, and top headlines at a glance. Browse through stories with the flick of a finger.
Download our app for unrestricted news. You know, they should have been saying that for the last 20 years. They weren't. You know what they were saying? Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. There's something more interesting on another channel. Radio and television had it all to themselves for decades. They, and only they, were the media. They got fat and lazy. They refused to be dragged into the 21st century. They either didn't see it coming, or more likely, didn't understand it. They committed the biggest mistake in capitalism. They did not realize what business they were in. I know this firsthand. I've been in those meetings. You start discussing websites, social, and connectivity, and their eyes would glaze over. Larry, you don't seem to understand. We sell radio commercials on air. That's how we make our money. Well, you can only sell those ads if you have an audience that hears them. And I don't know if you've noticed, but many of them have gone elsewhere. So how do we get a piece of that pie? Radio has always been in the business of connecting, providing interesting content, being a social outlet, creating talk, reflecting talk. It's the same business Facebook started out in. We were all in the same business. The big difference now is that Facebook and Google, etc., retain data. Because of their platform, they know who you are, what you want, and when you want it. It's the holy grail of advertising. Radio and TV for years, and still, were basically just guessing who was out there, extrapolating based on inaccurate, outdated survey methods. Facebook, Google, that's hard data. So yeah, their money is mostly in data now. But contact, creativity, content, that's the business model. It should be, but then really wasn't in my experience. Larry, we sell radio ads on air. And I have no reason to believe that upper management at Bell Media was any smarter than any other big money radio TV company. The years I worked at Bell only support this theory. There is not one broadcaster on the Bell Board of Directors, including the chair, Mirko Bibic. Generally speaking, management in radio and TV does not come from the content side. It comes from sales, from accounting, from money. Granted, a lot of broadcasters aren't really interested in management. They're interested in broadcasting. But still, the people who create content in broadcasting are largely unrepresented on the management and board level. What does that mean? It means, in Bell's case, that they are in the business of making money. Money is no longer the reward for creating a good product. Money becomes the business. It's the old saying, money is not the game, money is how we keep score. What happens when money becomes the game? Well, you've got BCE, corporate entity. They don't care what they're making down there on the factory floor. Could be a TV show, could be a coffee machine or a widget. They just see the books. They answer only to the shareholders and board members. They must show a profit on the quarterly report. How can you see the big picture or have a long-term plan when all you do every day is make sure that the bottom line number 3 months from now is going to be bigger than the one you have today. It's brutal. Bell Corporate Entity President Mirko Bibic annual compensation is about $13.5 million every year. About 10% of that is salary, $1.3 million just to show up at work, be in the office, take calls, return emails. The rest is based on bonuses and stock options. What that means is that Mirko does better when the company shows a profit on a quarter. Stock prices go up. Do you think Mirko's motivation would be then to create a better product at the expense of the company? Or, cancel W5 so that you can show a profit, and some of those company profits end up in Mirko's bank account. Bell Media did exactly what the Prime Minister said they did. They systematically watered down the product offering based on bottom-line thinking, and when fewer people engaged, largely due to their corporate short-sightedness and ineptitude, they cried foul, non-viable. They asked the government for money, pleaded for laws that required Google and Facebook to pay them. And when all that wasn't enough, they just fired people, sold off assets, and shuttered radio stations. Hard to believe the Bay are still employed. Listen, radio is dead, in my opinion, but it was filicide. Parent kills offspring. No one needs music radio. Talk radio, maybe. I mean, there are 3.2 million podcasts in the world, and I'll bet a handful of them are talking about something that interests you right now. Radio is dead. And TV, well, I don't even know what TV is anymore. I really don't. Do they? Here's what we do know. With the stroke of a pen, perhaps a single keystroke on a laptop, Bell Media turned the lives of 20,000 people upside down, only so that they could increase dividends for shareholders and show a quarterly profit, so that the boss and his cronies can get their annual bonus. That's just business, right? Well, no, especially when it comes to news and information. News and information is existential. You don't run a healthcare system based on a business model because that is inhumane. Same with news and information. Bell Media, in this latest mass execution, actually said that news was losing $40 million annually. BCE, Bell Corporate Entity, has a net worth of about $50 billion, billion with a B. So their news division loss is less than 0.1% of their net value. Not 1, but 0.1. Less than 0.1. If you call yourselves media, then you dedicate yourself to that commitment. Why don't you charge more for your crappy cop, lawyer, doctor shows on CTV? Maybe cut back on Mary Berg's budget. Do you really need that many people on The Social talking about nothing? But then you'd have to be a broadcaster to understand that reasoning. They are not. They are bankers and accountants. Why didn't traditional media invent Facebook? They were in that business. They were right there. Could have done it if the necessary atmosphere had been cultivated. Even today, Bell Media could start their own Facebook. Why don't they? It's not too late. There are at least 50 profitable car makers in the world. Different brands of cereal take up an entire aisle at the grocery store. Social media, 5 or 6 top brands. There's room for more. But yeah, you'd have to be an innovator or a chance taker, a visionary. Where are those people? I don't know where they are. I know where they're not. Bell Media.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.